Hey, what's up, guys? Thanks for tuning in. This is your host, Brian Caderna, and you're now listening to the Caderna Podcast. So a few months back, I was watching a segment on 60 Minutes on the economy that featured Fed Chairman Jerome Powell. And when asked about the greatest threat to our economy, he replied that it is cyber, which was kind of surprising to me from a finance guru with everything you think about with debt, interest rates, inflation, and so many of the different things you hear in the news every day. But then just a week ago, I was listening to another podcast that featured General Stanley McChrystal, the former head of Joint Special Operations Command, in which he said that a huge cyber attack on America is not probable, but imminent. It's just a matter of when and how bad. So having heard, quite a bit about cybersecurity, and it's certainly front and center now in more ways than just one, as the Fed chairman alluded to. So today I'm really excited to join an expert on this exact issue. So today we speak with Michael Abboud. Michael is the CEO and founder of TetherView, a leading private cloud provider based in New Jersey. His firm helps companies build secure, compliant, and resilient business networks. If you notice the name, it's probably from one of the many conferences Mike has spoken at on the matters of cybersecurity and digital compliance. In his spare time, he's also a consultant to Columbia University's Center for Technology Management. Michael has more than 15 years of healthcare and business technology experience, and he attended both New York University and St. John's University, graduating with a degree in finance. Our conversation touches on topics such as ransomware, the Solarwinds and print nightmare attacks, computer literacy for youth, which I can't underscore enough, and how to stay safe on the web. So without further ado, please join us with Michael Abboud.
Is going to require work and time and sweat and toil.
If money wasn't an issue, what would I be doing?
Don't worry about it. You'll figure it out.
Change is the only constant.
The Caderna Podcast.
Hey, Brian, thanks for having me. Pleasure to be here.
Yeah, certainly. We're happy to have you here. So I know when we first started to talking, you hear a lot about this in the news right now. Everybody is pretty concerned about cyber. And it's my understanding that the Biden administration just released a new approach on cybersecurity for federal agencies that, again, my understanding, it relies a lot on cloud computing to fend off hackers and kind of modernize these defenses. So I thought we could start there and just kind of get your take on what they're doing. Is it working? And how that's unfolding right now.
Yeah, happy to jump in there. In the wake of the Solarwinds attack late last year, it was announced that basically every single Windows machine in the world was vulnerable. And it was discovered that Solarwinds manufactured or produces software that helps large organizations, small organizations, manage their IT infrastructure. So if you think about it, it's the ultimate backdoor. And these hackers, had access to these backdoors now, what we're finding after doing a deep dive, for many years. So what's concerning is that the repercussion of that hack is still not fully known. A real hacker, especially a government-sponsored hacker, their objective is to get in, be stealth, right? And not even know that they're there and kind of just collect data as much as possible. And these folks figured it out. I mean, they were in the back end of these networks at the highest permission levels, able to see everything that was going on for multiple years. And it was almost discovered by accident, that this exposure was there.
Wow.
And so
what was SolarWinds, if you can just kind of refresh everyone's memory on what exactly that was?
Yeah, so the Solarwinds hack, again, right? It's a piece of software that has been around for decades. Really powerful tool, and it allows IT professionals, the folks who manage IT infrastructure, to do that, right? It allows you to see machines that are on, activity inside a machine, remote into machines, take over these machines, and manage them. And so that's like the holy grail for a hacker, right? Wow. It's like the master key to get into everything.
So now you're saying, go back to that point that you said that they're kind of like they're the ones that got in, but we're also kind of relying on them at the same point.
Well, so SolarWinds was the company that got breached, right?
Mm-hmm.
So what happened was the hackers got into the SolarWinds environment, and they were able to inject some code that gave them the ability to kind of get control of almost anybody's infrastructure, right? And so SolarWinds was the company that was breached. And as a result of them getting breached, all of their clients and anybody who was using their tools, certain tools, were breached as well.
Okay. That's it seems like there could be almost like no end to this when you hear it like that they just it's kind of like they can get their fingers into anything from there.
Yeah, there really is no end to it, right? Especially that particular vulnerability. You have to assume that anything that was on a server during that period of the known breach has been exposed. And then just to continue that thought a little bit, there was a vulnerability announced by Microsoft called Print Nightmare. I don't know if you heard about that or not. Most people haven't.
Not really, no.
Right. And so Print Nightmare was also another vulnerability announced by Microsoft. And as you know, Microsoft powers 85 to 90% of every operating system in the world is touched by Microsoft. So Print Nightmare was an exposure in everybody's computer, every single operating system across anything that had a Microsoft operating system had that exposure. And what that allowed hackers to do is literally remote take over a computer very easily. Not much skill necessary to do it. And again, that exposure is it's undefinable. You can't really. I lose my words to define the scope and what that has created. So you have to go on the assumption there that based on that exposure, you might, if you didn't have the proper tools to kind of see and create additional perimeters. Sorry to use it, not really a technical word, but to create additional barriers for hackers to get in, you have to assume that your entire network was exposed. And even today, most people and even most service providers don't take, and this is the unfortunate part, they don't take it seriously enough, right? So Print Nightmare is what we refer to as a 0-day vulnerability, right? So 0-day vulnerability, what that means is the manufacturer of the service of the software announces, hey, I've got this huge gap that we discovered in my software, and we're telling you, you have to plug it today. But when they tell you, they're also telling all the bad guys, right? So you as a small business owner, as other small business owners, they sit there and they depend on like Microsoft's of the world or maybe their service providers to plug these holes. But when you announce that 0-day vulnerability, it's literally telling everybody who may or may not have been aware of it, now I can go and get data from wherever I like.
Wow.
So again, it's a lot to digest, right? But it's literally every single computer, right? And for the past few years, like for the past 6 months, what I do with some folks is like, I say, hey, let's go on your computer and see if you've ran an update, right? And to make the situation worse with like Print Nightmare, for example, it's a very complicated update. It actually requires you to update your computer multiple times before you can get rid of that particular exposure, right? And most people don't do that, right? So if you're even sitting at home and you're stuck on your computer and you see, hey, 10, 15, 20, 30 updates to go, you might hit it once, go walk away. You think it's running. The next day, it may or may not run. But it's a pretty complicated update to push. And if not done properly, you can actually have a sense of false security thinking that it is updated, but you still have that vulnerability.
And now, just out of curiosity, like when an event like that happens, is there any way to go back and see if your stuff, whether it's an individual or a company, like if their stuff was actually copied or exposed? Or is there just no telling? Like you were exposed, yeah, we don't know if they're doing anything or if they actually have your information though.
Yeah, I mean, so I've been involved in a number of investigations, and yes, you can. It requires some forensics. right? Some pretty detailed kind of diving into the back end of machines to kind of determine what the level of exposure is. But it's hard for, a non-highly trained non-tech person to determine that, right? And so it's important, for businesses to really protect themselves, So some of the conversations we have, it's like, I do a lot of work with, I'm involved with Columbia University, and one of the folks that I work with, my mentor over there, a guy named Tom Cowan, we have this theory of this is an unwinnable battle, right? And we're kind of, joking around about it, but if it's unwinnable in the sense that you need to kind of stay on top of it, right? And unfortunately, a lot of folks have that mentality, like, hey, I can't beat the system. So look, if the NSA got hacked, what's the big deal if I get hacked, right? And the problem, that's really the crux. If I wanted to tell you where my frustration point with cybersecurity is, it's right there. It's this lack of responsibility. It's not my job. I'm not a tech person. Why should I be responsible for protecting my computer, my data?
Yeah. And I think that's a great segue too. I think what so many people struggle with is you hear what you just laid out in the past 5-10 minutes, and it can be horrifying. It's like, oh my gosh, you're telling me almost everything I have, everything I work for or create could possibly be exposed and or stolen. And then I think kind of the knee-jerk reaction to that is like either A, you're going to panic, or B, you're going to put your head in the sand and say, this is just nuts. Let's go on living our lives. What else are we going to do? So like, what is the person or the company, like, what are they supposed to do amidst their daily lives to be safe, but not just go crazy every day?
Look, I think you have to evaluate the risk, just like in your world, it's a risk reward situation. If you have data that's very benign, okay, and it's pretty obvious, it's not critical, okay, use it in a less safe way, maybe, okay. But if you're a registered investment advisor, right, or you're in the healthcare world, or you're in another situation where a breach could create reputational harm to you, you really got to analyze and say, hey, if this data gets out there, it's going to be really harmful to me, either financially, in a reputational format, or, it could be you're working on the next formula to Coke, right? And it gets out there, and now, your life's work is gone. So what we ask people to do is really just sit there and analyze the risk on what they're doing. So for example, one of the things we like to do is separate your business data from your personal data, right? And not even give you the ability to commingle the two, right? Mm-hmm. So one of the technologies that I strongly advocate, is the use of something called a virtual desktop. And this is not for the consumer, right? So the concept of a virtual desktop is that it's built for businesses. So someone like, me, anybody who works in a business, who now is probably working remote 50+% of the time, working from home, want to be on the road, you have your virtual desktop. So now you have this virtual desktop, which is very locked down environment, right? And we've coined this term here at TetherView called the digital bunker. And again, the concept of the digital bunker is that we use this virtual desktop, which allows you to log into your work environment from any device, any place, anywhere, over any internet connection. But once you're in there, it's a highly controlled space, right?
Okay.
So if you think of like Mission Impossible, right, where I think it was the first one that Tom Cruise did, where he's hanging from the ceiling and he's breaking into that secure room, right? We want to create a situation where it's a highly controlled environment, so that you're not opening your Gmail account, right? Talking to your friends about the football game, and then clicking some silly link, at 2:00 in the morning. And then exposing your corporate data by doing that.
Okay.
So
would that be a VPN? Is that
no?
That's something different.
Yeah, that's something different. So the concept of a VPN, it's technology that was built. I want to say it was first developed like in the 80s with the modem. right?
Okay.
And literally the concept of a VPN is now you're saying you've got your trusted network where your corporate crown jewels are, right? And let's call that the crown jewels. And now you're saying, Brian's working from home. I'm going to create a VPN from his laptop that's not maintained, that's not up to date, that's subject to all of these print nightmare and 0-day vulnerabilities. And I'm going to say, I trust that laptop implicitly. And so when I create that VPN, I'm doing a handshake and I'm giving that laptop that's sitting God knows where access to my network. So what we want to do is minimize the number of VPNs that an organization has. And because a VPN is like an open window. As soon as you open the window, anything can come in. You might put a screen to stop the insects, but you're not going to stop the noxious gas from coming in, if someone wanted to do that.
Got it. Yeah, because you hear a lot of these different terms or acronyms kind of thrown around. And like you mentioned, I mean, full disclosure for everybody, obviously I'm a registered investment advisor, CFP. And we seem to have every day, endless layers of new updates and encryptions and oversight and all this stuff that I don't really understand. And I think for a lot of business owners, it's somewhat of a leap of faith that, you say, okay, I'm either doing it on my own, which maybe the small entrepreneur does, or when you get into the places, like you said, healthcare, finance, now you're usually outsourcing to bigger companies, or if you're large enough, have your own IT company. And you're just hoping that all these things, which are really like in our world, are abiding by the guidelines set out by FINRA and SEC and others, that the IT guys kind of have to follow whatever they're putting out to stay compliant. And you just hope that all of that together is like enough. So it is interesting because it seems like a lot of people aren't experts, but those experts are the ones that kind of hold the keys to the castle in a sense.
Yeah, it's funny. The IT guy, I put my hands up in quotes here on an audio podcast, but the IT guy in a business, and I'm one of them. The concept is still that the IT guy is responsible for anything that's plugged into a wall, right? Mm-hmm. and unfortunately, that's still kind of the boards of organizations, the stakeholders of organizations, big and small, they're not giving IT guys a seat at the table where they should be. Some organizations use it, like fintech firms with prop trading, right? They look at it, right, and they say, hey, IT is also building this algorithm to trade all sorts of derivatives and make money, but they're still putting in pieces of IT and not separating it into the way it should be. So again, my goal as an IT practitioner is to take the sharp, pointy scissors away from, folks like you, the kindergartner running around the kindergarten. I want to take those sharp, pointy scissors away from you so you don't stab one of your other classmates as you're running around the kindergarten, because you have to focus on your job, right? You have to focus on your core competency, whether it's healthcare or financial services. But we have to get folks, to recognize that we have to come up with simpler, more elegant solutions than just adding layers and layers of complexity. Because as you add pieces to a puzzle, right? One of my favorite quotes is from Einstein. And he says, everything should be made as simple as possible, but not simpler, right? And I love that. As a technologist, I love that. I have a strong technology background, and, I love the German engineering, especially in the healthcare devices. And if you look at some German engineering, great stuff, but they probably have 5 too many pieces inside, some of they're notorious for making things beautiful and complicated. You look at an American, maybe design machine, and it's got 5 fewer pieces. And what that means is it's easier to manage. When something breaks, there's fewer things that I need to look at to determine what broke and how to fix it, right? So my goal is to reduce your IT footprint, right? Knowing that you're going to click that silly link, right? We all do it. And minimizing the exposure when you do click that silly link.
Mm-hmm. And now bringing that back to where we started with, this has been a little bit more of a conversation with the Biden administration, which obviously has a ton on its plate right now. But what was the crux of what they're trying to do lately, and what's your critique on what you're seeing right now?
Yeah, I mean, I give them a B+ for effort, right?
Okay.
But what they've done is they've just passed legislation that says if you have been hacked, you have to notify the authorities.
Okay.
To me, I mean, that really doesn't help, right? What we need to do is come up with more of like a fire code for cybersecurity, right? So if we or like seatbelts, right? If you go back to when like cars in the 60s, they had no seatbelts. There was like the slick bucket seat that went across from the drivers to the passenger, and you could fit 4 people across. There was no seatbelts, and then they introduced the lap belt, right? And the lap belt was great. It reduced the impact of a crash, and I can share a video with you offline about it. It's pretty cool, actually. And then they introduced the shoulder belt, right? And that progression, really saved lives, right? I mean, we were on track where, motor vehicle accidents, I think, were the number one a cause of death, for a while, ahead of heart disease.
Sure.
And now that's changed. And the same thing with cybersecurity, right? Everyone knows that they shouldn't, do certain things on the internet while they have their corporate email open or something like that, but they do it anyway. So my job as a practitioner is to prevent those bad things from happening. And so again, back to the question, reporting that you've been breached it's great, right? I think that's a small piece of it, but more importantly, there are some really basic things that we can tell people you should be doing that don't cost you much to do, and that will eliminate a lot of these risks that we see.
Okay. And I mean, what are some of those things, if you don't mind? Like if you have like a cliff notes of what people can easily say, okay, I took a few steps but it got me 90% of the way there, maybe.
Look, the first thing is don't use your Netflix password for your email. Okay. And the president of Netflix is reportedly coming to Fort Monmouth. We're really excited about what it's going to do for the area here too, by the way. But the CEO of Netflix, I think I read an article in the Wall Street Journal where he said, look, our primary objective is to get our content out there and make it easier for our viewers to do it, right? They know that you share your Netflix password between people. I mean, that's not a secret, right? So don't use that Netflix password that's like, Yankees 123 as your same password as your email, right? The hackers know that. The hackers have, Netflix is a honeypot, so to speak, of, hey, if I have if I have everyone's Netflix password, I probably have 30% of the folks' email password, and people know that. The next thing that you should do, a little more technical, is turn multi-factor authentication on for anything you can. That's important. A lot of folks think it's a pain, but it really isn't. It's going to save everyone a lot of heartache. So turn multi-factor authentication on any place you can. Don't opt out. Turn it on.
And that's where you're logging in and then you're getting a text code and then you use that to log in again, sort of thing.
Yeah, exactly. You're getting a text code, or you use Google Authenticator, and there's like a 6-digit code that's all randomly changing that you can use. Okay. And if I was going to break it down, those are probably the 2 most important things. Again, use a good password. Don't use the same password everywhere, and turn on multi-factor authentication are probably the 2 most important things you could do as kind of like a do-it-yourself kind of guide for cybersecurity. Okay.
And now kind of, I guess, overstepping just what households are doing or the small business, what is like the government's role? I think that's where a lot of people get a little bit unclear, is they might think, hey, I live in America. The government is protecting me, just like we have this enormous military and everything else, and we have police officers running around the city. They must be protecting me. But is that wholly true in the cyberspace, or is there a government outfit that is strictly their job? Or where is, because you hear a lot about like this private public partnership of who's ultimately going to be responsible to safe house all of our data. Where are we at with that right now?
Look, I think we are far behind where we should be. So you've got lots of regulators, unfortunately. That's what we do, is we tend to overregulate. And kind of like the healthcare system, right? There's multiple healthcare systems. But here we've got like Cyber Command, you've got the FBI, you've got local authorities, you've got the three-letter agencies that all have a hand in cybersecurity, but they all have different objectives and different missions. So you can't rely on the government to protect you. You have to really understand that you're on your own, and the government, it's just too big, right? They're always going to be behind the curve, and significantly behind the curve, because the priorities are shifting. So if you're a business that has 1,000 or less employees, and you're relying on a small team, to provide you with cybersecurity exclusively, you need to reevaluate that. You need to ask, what expertise does everybody have? What type of continuing education is my team doing to stay ahead of the curve, besides reading Reddit, and GitHub for the latest trends? So it's important that I think the way to do is kind of self-regulation, right? Industries should self-regulate themselves. Like the SEC is actually doing a really good job about it. And if we take a snapshot from the SEC and how they're enforcing that, I think that's a really, really good example for publicly traded companies. I don't think they've quite got it down yet for like RIAs like yourself. But if you're a publicly traded company and you have an internal auditor, an external auditor, they are, and really just this year, we're starting to see them pick up the game and enforce some of these basic hygiene that these organizations should be doing.
Okay. And now on the flip side of this, so you hear about like they create all these different protocols that you have to follow and safekeeping and whatnot. What happens on the other side? Because you think like in the world of crime, certainly the police can say, hey, lock your doors at night. But then their job is if somebody broke in, they're going to go find them and then they're going to be brought to justice. Does that happen in the cyberspace? Like, do we ever really actually catch the bad guys? And are there penalties for that? Because it just always seems to be, oh, it was probably some kid in a basement in Russia that got into Target or Bank of America, and they kind of draw up that picture. What happens? I mean, has there been like a big, have they caught like one of the big bad guys, if you will?
Occasionally they put somebody in the paper that they catch them, right? But it's a faceless crime, right? So when someone goes in and robs a bank physically for $1,000, the cops show up, there's cameras, they catch the guy, they prosecute him, they charge him for 15 different, crimes. But when someone hacks a bank and steals $1 million, it's like, the bank is responsible, and depending on the person who's the victim might be responsible. So they're on their own, because they probably didn't have multi-factor authentication on, or they weren't auditing their systems properly. So this is something that we can't rely on the government to do. It's too big of a problem. Quite honestly, it's too big of a problem. It's not realistic to think that the government alone is going to come up and protect us.
Okay. No, that's fair enough. And just to talk about some of these threats, not to scare anybody, but I mean, I had watched 60 Minutes. This was probably 2-3 months ago now, where they had the Fed chairman, Jerome Powell, on. And he said that this is kind of caught me, because you think, oh, the Fed chairman, we're just going to talk finance and monetary issues. And he said that the greatest economic threat today is cyber. And then I was listening to a podcast not too long ago with General Stanley McChrystal, and he was on there, and he said that an enormous cyber attack on our country isn't probable. It's imminent. It's just, when is it going to happen is the real question. So you hear these things, and that's what I wanted to ask you is like, what would you say is like the great threat? You hear a lot about ransomware with hospitals and things. Is that it? Like, are we waiting to see one of those on a grand scale, or like what would it be that people are really, really keeping their eye on?
Look, I mean, not to be a fear monger, right? But our electrical infrastructure and our municipal infrastructure is grossly unprepared for a cyber attack. Okay. I would argue that at any moment, any number of government, sponsored folks can just shut it down. And the problem is again, right? You take these small municipalities. What makes our country great is that, it's governed by the people, right? And so you have small municipalities that run their towns, and it's a great way in terms of getting the people's voice out there. The problem is that it's a small municipality who runs their own sewer authority, right? And they've got a Wi-Fi password of 123. They're not backing up their data, and hackers can very easily access that valve and turn off the sewer system. So yes, I think the threat of cyber attack is real. I think it's bigger than anybody kind of wants to believe, because it's just so enormous. You're like, if it happens, it happens almost, right? Again, this unwinnable kind of theory. But if we go back to what I was saying before, if we just take some practical approaches, and self-govern, and maybe come up with a fire code or create another ad council ad like seatbelt save lives, right? We just need to get awareness out there that folks need to take this more seriously, because the impact hasn't been felt yet, but it's real. And that's the problem right there, Brian, is that no one has really felt the really long-term impact of this. But there have been huge hacks, right, that have really disrupted and had some real impact. I mean, we look at Maersk, right? I don't know if you know who Maersk is. They're the big shipping line. Mm-hmm. They controlled a huge number. I forget what it was at one time, but at the time of the hack, it was, I think, like 50% of the shipping infrastructure of the world. They were hacked a number of years ago, and it shut down shipping for like 2 days, right? Imagine if we had a hack that does that today and amplifies the supply chain issues that we have. And that's the problem, is that no one's really creating that awareness, and that's my concern.
Yep. And just out of curiosity, maybe I don't know how much you know about that particular issue, but when you hear something like that, like they got hacked and it shut down the shipping for 2 days, which on that scale is obviously tremendous, the impact. But why just 2 days? Like, was this something that then the company, if you will, is kind of reacting to it rather than preventing it, which would be ideal? And how do they react? Does it just come down to these issues where you're kind of paying off the bad party to kind of turn back on your lights, if you will?
So without getting too technical, I know a couple of folks that worked on the remediation of that hack, and I've talked to them, and there's a lot of case studies in the industry around that. And it was totally reactive, right? So they had every single government agency, the United Nations had folks in there. This was like a world issue, right? And they reacted, and they got the brightest and best there. And at the end of the day, what would have prevented that from being so dramatic was just some simple segregation and separating their networks, right? So again, basic hygiene could have prevented that. And now they're probably way ahead of the game because they paid the price early on, and maybe they're lucky because they paid the price early on. But I think there's a multitude of other organizations that just aren't paying attention. They don't think it's significant. If we take it like the sewer and some of these municipal authorities, they're like, who's going to want to shut down the sewer? But, why not? Right? It's an easy target. And think about how disruptive that would be if the sewer system for New York City goes offline for 2 days.
Yeah. What a mess you would have to deal with. And so I think there's almost like two categories here. There's like the malicious attack like that of we're just going to cause upheaval for a big segment of the population by taking away electric or sewer or what have you. And then there's like the identity theft of being your organization got hacked and now people have your social, they've got your date of birth, things like that. And it seems like what you hear a lot about now is, this identity theft software. Can you, or not software, I should say, but programs. Can you tell people what exactly that does? Sometimes and I don't know the names, but some will say, okay, we'll reimburse people up to $1 million of damages if you got hacked and someone was able to take out 20,000 from your checking account. What is that? I mean, can you talk a little bit about that too?
Yeah, I mean, what's great about that, just kind of circle it back, is that it creates awareness, right? So you've got LifeLock. I think they're partnered with Norton now. I forget who they partnered with, or Norton bought them, and they've tied in their kind of ID management with security and credit management with their online security. And what that's done is created awareness. Look, let's face it, the person who's buying that insurance or buying that service is thinking about it. And that's just good enough on its own. And if you're thinking about it, you're going to do some practices just to prevent things. So you're going to turn on multi-factor authentication. Hopefully you're not going to use your Netflix email. And they're also going to, part of that service is they monitor you on the dark web. And again, that's reactionary, but it's something. So, they're monitoring databases, for getting hacked. Equifax breach, I'm not sure, but they may have been breached recently again. But the Equifax breach is again a honeypot. If I could get to Equifax, I've got everybody's social security number and their address, and I could spoof your identity anywhere. So creating these services, not only does it help protect you in terms of monitoring the dark web for potential breaches that impact you, and giving you insurance, but I think it just creates awareness, that you need to pay attention to this stuff.
Okay. And you mentioned dark web, which you hear a lot about. It sounds kind of spooky. What exactly is the dark web? Like, how does somebody go there and say, am I on the dark web? Am I clean? Like, can you discuss that just for a minute?
Yeah. So the dark web you're not going to get there through Google. You're not going to get there through any known browser, right? You've got to download software that essentially creates the dark web. Is considered a dark web because it's a bunch of individual computers that act as their own network of information. So there's not a centralized repository like Google is searching and indexing sites and they've got everything cataloged nicely. With the dark web, it's not so simple because it's nodes of computers that are scattered around the world that you search to get this data.
Okay. And then what happens when people do that and they're like, oh, wow, I didn't realize my social was out there or my date of birth or whatever. Is it just for a sense of awareness, or is then there an exercise to go through to start cleaning that up?
Well, so again, these services that are doing that, what they do is they're monitoring the dark web for various breaches, right? They're monitoring the government agencies that are gathering the reports of breaches from organizations and vulnerabilities from organizations. And then they're alerting the consumer. Hey, you subscribe to Equifax and your information was part of the breach. The database that was breached on such and such date, your driver's license in there, your social security number was in there, your birthday was in there. You should, change your credit cards. You should, do all of these things in response to that.
Okay. Yeah, because I feel like a lot of people, that's fairly common. You've got to get the new credit card because they're wherever it may have been, could have been a potential breach. And then you got to go reset all your credit card auto payments and all these different things. That's kind of like a common story you hear from folks. but there's no resetting your social or resetting your date of birth. It seems like once that's out of the bag, it's out. Like, how do you kind of put that back in the bottle?
Yeah, it's an interesting point about social. So I just did a webinar with Dr. Yoon Park out of Korea. And she works with the World Health Organization, and she's an advisor to some pretty large social media companies. And she wrote a book called IQ, EQ, DQ. And I'm doing a plug for her book, but it's a great book. So it's really focused around her passion is digital intelligence for children, right? How are we reshaping a child's mind by introducing the tablet at 2 years old, right? What does that do to them? What does that do to them developmentally, right? And then the book talks about social media, and there's a lot of statistics in the world, and it's a great book because it compresses 15 years of her research into a 5-hour read for most folks. And the data is just it's amazing, right? It's clear scientific data. She's a statistician by her PhD, and it talks about girls are very susceptible to tics, and when they're exposed to social media and cyberbullying, their stress levels just gather up, and you can see physical tics from them. So it's a great read. If you're a parent, you're thinking about being a parent, it helps you kind of frame the importance of social media and how to teach your children how to use it properly. But what I also wanted to bring up is, you talked about your social, media handle getting stolen. One of the things that I am passionate about too is this concept of anonymity on the internet. I get it. I understand that you want to be anonymous on the internet and you want to be able to kind of do things for your own protection, right? But there should also, and what we lack today on the internet, in social media platforms, is verified identities, right? We have the technology to confirm that a 14-year-old girl who's saying that she's 21 because she wants to get onto TikTok, okay, is 14. We have facial recognition. We have so many different things. We can run algorithms just based on her inputs into the keyboard to tell us that she's not 18, older than 18. But yet we knowingly allow these minors access to these social media platforms, that their brains aren't ready to ingest this data, right? And what Dr. Park is saying in her book is we need to be aware of that. And that's changing the way, humans are evolving. But my point to her is, and I'll stop here in a second, but my point to her is we also have the ability to say, I want to be on a fully verified platform. And that hasn't gone mainstream yet. And that's frustrating to me because, look, if you want to voice your opinion anonymously and you want to hate monger anonymously, great. I'm going to take that with a certain degree of seriousness. But if you're going to do that and be totally verified that it's you, now I might respect you and I might have a different opinion of what you're saying.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many ways I could go from that. And I just think of it too. I mean, we have 3 teens and, TikTok, Snapchat, that stuff is just kind of like dominating a generation. It seems like they can't get their heads out of it. So it is frightening because it's like, well, where does that all go? And what is that all connected to? And there's so many, from emotional consequences to going back to hacking and things like that. When you think about Facebook and some of these huge social media giants and the conversation and controversy around all of the information that they're gathering and all this data and how they're monitoring and almost creating like a profile of how you think and what you do on the web, it really starts to become, and I think to that lady's book, it's almost like a collision of, economics and then security. And it's almost like, I was just thinking as you were saying that, like the conversation back with cigarettes, when it's like, oh, well, you got to be 18 to go buy a cigarette, but all the big cigarette companies would want to market it to 14 and 15-year-olds because they knew that could, build a whole new economy for them. And I think that's kind of the same thing with social media is, if we can lure in a 12 or 13-year-old and addict them, we've got a customer for maybe the next 5-10 years. So that's a huge thing. I mean, I'd love to get your input on it, but like, I assume there's no real easy answer on how to govern that.
There isn't, right? And again, just referring back to that book, because I thought it really just synthesized the information. We just have to develop like this universal moral code, right? And we have to say there's just a lack of common sense here, guys. We're handing our child, who's a 6-year-old, who's using their mom's account because they couldn't access TikTok otherwise. Okay. And you have no way of monitoring all of the 3-second videos that are in front of this kid going forward, right? What is the long-term impact of that? We don't know, right? So the only answer that I could come up with, again, is we need to develop, and the government's not going to be able to solve this, right? It's just not, it's too big to say, I'm going to let some government agency figure this out. Come on, guys, let's apply a little bit more common sense than that. By the time the government can get out of their own way in this highly, divisive environment that we built for ourselves, it's going to be too late if it's not too late already. So again, we just have to apply common sense, right? What I don't understand is why platforms like Facebook, platforms like TikTok, platforms, and those are the two really that control everything else essentially. Why aren't they allowing a verified user, kind of piece? And why aren't they deploying technology that's so easy to deploy to validate that, yeah, maybe this is the mom's account, but the way they're acting on the device, it's really a 6-year-old, right? We know that, so that's the only solution I can come up with is eliminate the anonymity. Okay. Give yourself a safe space. Make sure you know who you're talking to on the other side of the conversation, and then we have the technology to determine who's actually at the controls. Let's use it, right?
It's so interesting because it sounds like ultimately what you're getting at is it all comes back to education, like that will be the only solution, really.
I mean, that's exactly right. Even like, taking it back to where we started in cybersecurity, you shouldn't click the link, right? We need to educate folks that before you click the link, just check that it's really Microsoft sending it to you, or verify that it's really your support team asking you to do that. And we just need to apply that same common sense to social media. It's the same thing with seatbelts, right? You're not going to get into a car without clicking the seatbelt. But it's amazing how slow it took humans to get to that concept, right? I mean, I'm not that old. I remember being a kid and getting in a car and kids were like, oh, it's not cool to put on the seatbelt, still. But now that's not going to happen, right? So we need to just, as humans, we need to apply just a little bit more common sense to this concept of social media. And I think especially to the concept of cybersecurity, where I'm seeing, just low-lying fruit. Where we're able to help organizations very easily, kind of plug some big holes.
Okay. Well, that's good that it sounds like some of the big ones are relatively easily fixable. But just to take us back a little bit, I know when we went through your bio, it sounds like you started, actually studying finance. What are you seeing, like kids that are up and coming now and realize that cybersecurity is such a huge and growing field, and they go to college, maybe one of these lofty universities with dreams of working for the CIA or the NSA or for Apple or anything like that? What are they getting taught? Like, are they even keeping up with the curve? Like you said, the government's always well behind the curve, especially with internet-based issues. What are we getting taught now, and what are we trying to educate without getting too technical? I mean, what does that curriculum sort of look like?
Look, I think I think we're getting better at it, but I don't think we're teaching the basics of coding to our kids, right? So something that should be, in my opinion, early curriculum, lower school, the end of lower school, is start teaching kids Python, right? Really simple language. It was designed to be a simple language, and it just trains your brain to think in terms of that, right? You know, we are developing into artificial intelligence. We're not artificial intelligence didn't come first. There's clearly, we know what the chicken and the egg first is here. The humans came first. We developed a code that's working towards artificial intelligence. I'll argue that we're not there yet. But if we don't teach our next generations how to harness that and stay ahead of that and get ahead of that curve, we're gonna drown behind it. So, you know, the curriculum, I think we need to start very early with some of these basic coding pieces. And then, you know, we also need to, when we go to colleges, we need to teach computer literacy, you know, at a deeper level and make it more of a trade, versus what's coming out is, you know, the traditional universities at four-year colleges, you know, folks are coming out and they can't jump in. They got to go back into a trade school, you know, like the DeVry's, like whatever, Phoenix universities. I'm not plugging them or promoting that, but, you know, let's face it, you walk out of a four-year college, I don't know what it does for you sometimes today. So we need to reevaluate what's happening there. And if we're going to invest hundreds of thousands of dollars in a four-year college program, let's make sure that we're educated, because let's face it, IT and cyber and technology touches every aspect of our life.
Mm-hmm. And so I agree wholeheartedly that some sort of base computer literacy should be there. And I'm glad you brought that up, because I'm always preaching financial literacy, and I've pushed that, you know, even publicly to a lot of schools and things. And you're seeing a lot of that. It's kind of like a buzzword now, which I'm really happy about. But I'd never heard that term, computer literacy, because I don't think, you know, the most I had in high school is you had a typing class that you just learned really how to master that keyboard, and that was it. And then the rest you just kind of learned as life went on. But like you said, tech is touching every aspect of life. So I think a base education of computer literacy is great. But what about, I mean, I assume that there are programs out there where if a high school graduate says, you know, I really want to get into cybersecurity, they do have those majors now, right? There are universities that do have a focus in that.
There definitely are. But I think we need to, you know, just to help society as a whole is, you know, we have an opportunity now, right, to say, hey, we've got these trillions of dollars in money that we're just putting out there. Let's put it towards education, right? And let's teach people just that basic digital literacy. So when they come onto a job, you know, they can add more value, right? Everybody needs it, right? Whether no matter what job you're doing, right? You know, having just some sense of more digital literacy or computer literacy is going to help you do that job better.
True. Here. I definitely agree with that. And so this has been a lot of really good information. Is there any other kind of like subject matter that we haven't touched on that I might just be kind of glossing over here that you definitely wanted to get off your chest?
No, I mean, we went pretty deep in an hour here. I'm impressed how far we went. So thank you for that. It was fun. Sure. It's been fun, and I'm enjoying it. But I think we really need to just focus on, you know, if I'm talking to small business owners out there, you really got to pay attention to cybersecurity, because yeah, maybe your data gets out there and it might not have an impact on you, but if you're shut down for a couple of days, it's going to have an impact on you. You're going to be less productive, right? Or, you know, let's talk about how we can make you more efficient. Are you using technology? Are you letting technology guide the way you run your business, right? It should be the opposite. You need to understand and make sure you have IT professionals around you that are giving you the ability to adapt and evolve, you know? And a great example of that is we have a lot of clients in the fintech space that are doing some amazing things, right? I mean, they're trading cryptocurrency and trading all sorts of any type of derivative. And these are some of the most fascinating minds in the world, that I have the privilege of servicing as a client. And they're a great example of they're never they came to us specifically, a little bit of a plug here, but they came to us specifically because we're giving them a platform that's agnostic, that's going to allow them to kind of always adapt and evolve. So before you buy that next computer, before you buy the next kind of piece of technology, ask yourself, is this going to be a brick in 6 months? Right. And that's kind of the thing that I challenge folks with is, are you buying technology that's going to evolve with you and help you evolve? And then the other piece that we ask folks is, are you overcomplicating your life with technology? While I'm a technology geek by every sense of the imagination, I'm also recognize that, hey, let's just break out the old hammer and chisel here and we'll solve for it. We don't need to overcomplicate the situation.
That's well said. And a couple last questions here. So from a security standpoint, who's got it down? Is it Mac or everybody else?
It's a very complicated answer. From a physical piece of hardware, Mac is great, but it's just a physical piece of hardware. So as soon as you open up a browser, as soon as you add anything to that, it's useless. But from a lockdown operating system, if you're in a personal situation, the Mac is a great option for you. If you're in a business, you need to make sure you have a platform that's going to evolve with you. And don't try to use just browser-based technology for everything, because again, you're limited by what the capabilities of that browser are.
Okay, interesting. And then I think a perfect close here, you touched on it just a minute ago, was on crypto. I think this would be a good way to merge and finalize our conversation with your world and my world. Can you just, without getting into which ones, Ethereum, Bitcoin, et cetera, what are the concerns ultimately with crypto? Because it seems like this universal currency amidst globalization and a kind of a smaller world that we live in today, it has some legs to stand on, that it's not going to go away. But then you hear, well, it all seems so hidden. It's such an easy way for, evildoers out there to move money, that this is like it could be a money laundering paradise in the space of crypto. This could be a whole nother conversation, but what are some of the thoughts there? And lastly, you hear blockchain kind of part and parcel to that. What is blockchain, and is that something we're going to see everywhere?
We could go for 4 hours on this one, but I'll try to condense it. I'll try to condense it to a couple of minutes here. So just on the blockchain piece, blockchain's a great piece of technology, right? A lot of people claim that they're using blockchain, and they're not, right? Or, the purpose of blockchain is to create immutable or unchangeable data, right? So that we know that this is true and verified, the ultimate verification, right? I can verify that I transferred the dollars or the currency to you on this day, and it was verified by however many different computers. And here's the blockchain that can't be changed because, it's impossible to change it. So that's blockchain. And it has uses. It's got a great, I can't get into it now. There's just way too much to do. It's got its great applications. And just be wary that when someone says they're using blockchain technology, if it's hosted on their own one single computer, that's not really blockchain, right? They're just using a database. So you have to be careful when you're hearing about blockchain. Distinguish between a traditional SQL Microsoft database and a blockchain environment. Okay. I mean, and then the biggest concerns on crypto, real quick, is that we don't regulate properly, or we overregulate, right? The theory that crypto enables criminals is just ridiculous, right? Criminals are going to find their way to do what they do, right? And so if you don't, go with it and figure out how to adopt it, they're going to go right past you. So criminals are going to be there forever, right? Let's just face it. Bad guys are going to be there. Locks keep the honest people honest, right? Bad guy wants in, he's going to get in. There's no doubt about it. And cryptocurrency, I think, it's a great great opportunity for, the world. I think it really is a great opportunity for society. And it's creating opportunity. It's creating opportunity for underprivileged, folks in different countries, to get access. It has the ability to stop runaway inflation in countries like, Venezuela and Brazil. If you look at the 80s, where, in the morning, a loaf of bread cost 10, whatever. And in the evening, it was 100, right? But your salary didn't change, So cryptocurrency, I think, is a gift to society, right? Not to sound too whatever. And we need to embrace it. Before the euro, we had hundreds of currencies in the world. And, when the big banks and the big governments were behind it, it was okay. Not to get too controversial here either. But now that we've got these thousands potentially of currencies out there that are quite honestly more visible as to what's going on, people are a little panicked because it's going to disrupt the system. And I understand that disruption is scary, but we should embrace that disruption, and use it to do great things.
That's well said. I like it. Well, I know I threw you a little curveball at the end, but I think that was a great summary. So, Michael, I really appreciate you coming on the show. I think there's some great nuggets of information that all of our listeners are going to walk away with today. So thank you very much for your time.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Pleasure. Thanks, Brian.
All right, everyone. Well, thank you for tuning in to another episode of the Caderna podcast. Again, I'm your host, Brian Caderna. Today, we had the pleasure of speaking with Michael Abboud from TetherView Technology. So we look forward to seeing you guys next week. Keep tuning in, and wherever you're listening, don't forget to leave us a review. Take care. This podcast is intended for the general public and for informational purposes only. The show does not provide any recommendations or investment advice regarding any specific account type, service, strategy, or product, or to otherwise act in any fiduciary or other capacity. Please contact a financial professional for guidance and information that is specific to your situation. Brian Caderna does not provide tax or legal advice. Please contact your accountant or legal advisor to discuss your situation. Guest speakers and their firms are not affiliated with or endorsed by Park Avenue Securities, Guardian, or Caderna Financial Team, and opinions stated are their own. All investments contain risk and may lose value. Past performance is not a guarantee of future results. References to specific securities, asset classes, and financial markets are for illustrative purposes only and do not constitute a solicitation, offer, or recommendation to purchase or sell a security. Brian Caderna is a registered representative and financial advisor of Park Avenue Securities, LLC, PAS. OSJ 300 Broadacres Drive, Suite 175, Bloomfield, New Jersey, 07003. Phone number 973-244-4420. Securities products and advisory services offered through PAS, member FINRA, SIPC. Financial representative of the Guardian Life Insurance Company of America, Guardian, New York, New York. PAS is a wholly owned subsidiary of Guardian. Caderna Financial Team is not an affiliate or subsidiary of PAS or Guardian. California Insurance License Number 0K04194.